Welcome to the Election University podcast, a weekly show where we hear from industry experts who share tips and tricks for winning campaigns. Whether you're running for office now, thinking about it for the future, or just want to know more about campaigns and elections, Election University is for you. With Election University, click, learn, win. And now your hosts, Jason Bennett and Rainey Cohen.
Hello.
Hi.
Rainey, how's it going this morning?
Oh, it's great. I've got my coffee. I'm pumped.
I do not have enough coffee.
You've made a huge mistake.
I know. There's not enough coffee in the world right now to kind of perk me up. It's early morning here in the recording studio, and we are excited yet not caffeinated enough for this episode. It's part 2 of our Political Spouses episode, one of our most popular episodes that we've had. You know, when we rank all 34 of our previous episodes so far, Political Spouses is at the top because we had a super interesting and very charming twosome that came on and talked to us about political spouses. So I'm really pumped about this episode.
Yeah, I go back and forth on whether or not I'm offended that it's our most popular episode because I wasn't on it.
Oh, wow.
Just kidding. But I'm very excited about today's because as a quasi-political spouse myself, I love talking to people about how they cope with their partners being sucked into the campaign world. I call myself a campaign widow because I'm just by myself a lot in this part of the season. So
you wear black through the whole political season with a veil.
I'm in mourning.
Oh.
No, just kidding. But I'm very excited to talk to Kerry today.
Yeah, she's going to be an excellent interview. So we are going to be talking with Kerry Kriseman, who is the spouse of the mayor of St. Petersburg, Florida. So we're zooming on over to the coast, and we're going to be talking to the spouse of Mayor Rick Kriseman, Kerry Kriseman. I'm very excited.
Yeah, and Kerry is a communications professional like myself with a history in broadcast, and so I know that we're going to get along right away. She's currently a public relations consultant at a mid-sized nonprofit called Creative Clay, and they serve individuals with neurodifferences through art programs, which sounds super interesting. I want to hear more about. They also, Kerry and Rick, are volunteer puppy raisers. And they are raising their 10th puppy right now.
Oh, like rescues?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. I need to ask about that. But this puppy's name is Jake.
Oh, cute.
And she also describes herself as an accidental political spouse. So I don't know if you saw that in her bio, but she put it in her bio.
Yeah. So, that's amazing. So this is our part 2 effort. In part 1, we had talked with Charlene Dougherty and Steve Williamson, the spouses of Commissioner Dougherty down in Austin, Texas, and Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal in Seattle, Washington. And now we're going to be talking with Kerry, who is also interested in writing a book about political spouses, which is one of the reasons how she stumbled on our podcast. So she had heard she's seeking out resources for spouses and figuring out, what's still needed out there. She stumbled on our episode, listened to it, loved it, reached out to us, said, hey, I have a whole bunch of information that I'm pulling together for this book, and I'd love to share it with you. And I can't wait to dive into that. That's going to be fantastic.
Yay.
All right, so let's do that.
Let's do it.
Let's dive into it. Kerry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about myself a little bit and what I've been up to.
Great. So in the pre-intro, what we talked about, it was a very brief synopsis of your bio and your husband's bio, but we'd love to talk a bit more about how you got involved in politics. Have you had a career around politics before your husband ran for office? And if so, what was it?
Before he got into politics, I worked for the St. Petersburg Times, which is now the Tampa Bay Times, when we were first married. And we were married in 1992, and our daughter was born in 1997. And I had, by the time I left the company, I had been there for 10 years, starting in the newsroom and moving up to marketing and communications. And I like to say I took a 10-year break from professional life to raise our 2 kids. In 1999 was when Rick got involved in politics. The level to which I had been politically active involved voting in most every election and being somewhat aware and having a friend through Rick who was a state legislator at the time. And that was really the extent of it until what I like to say is the conversation that started everything off.
We definitely want to talk about that because I think our listeners, we had mentioned in the intro that this series of episodes, the Political Spouses episodes, is one of our most popular in terms of listenership and downloads. And I think it's because there just aren't a lot of resources out there for political spouses, and the journey of someone who may or may not be reluctant along on the journey that sort of gets like pulled into this is really interesting for our listeners. I know it's certainly interesting for me.
Yeah.
Rainey is a political spouse herself, and so she understands all too well.
She understands.
Yeah.
Except my spouse works on the campaign side. She's not a candidate, so it's every year for me.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Never a break, and yeah. So
Nope.
you understand.
I do.
Exactly. Yep. It's like there's a bond, an unspoken bond, right?
That's
No matter
right.
which
Exactly.
side you're on, if you're in the world. You
Like,
understand.
I know how alone you are right now.
So talk to us about the races that you went through, and talk to us about which ones were contentious, and maybe give us a brief synopsis of what the talk involved.
What involved? I'm
The
sorry.
talk about getting his first run.
Oh, the conversation.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I'll start with that because that's what got everything started off, if that's okay.
Sure.
Like I said, one of Rick's longtime friends from high school had been a local state legislator. We would go out with him socially, just have dinner, hang out, what have you. And in 1999, it was the spring of 99, he just kind of casually brought it up that, hey, I heard that there's a city council seat that is going to be vacant because that council member is resigning to run for state house, and we think you'd be great. And Rick is an attorney by trade, and I feel through his work as an attorney has always had that calling to help people, and helping comes in many forms and fashions. And so we thought about it a little bit, and our daughter was about 1.5 at the time, and thought, why not? It was a very short campaign because this person had just decided to resign, and so it wasn't like there was a year or even 6 months. It was really a matter of a few months. So, our first foray into politics was inviting our good friends and family members to our house for like either $25 or maybe not even $50 at that time per head wine and cheese fundraiser that we put on ourselves.
Nice.
So that's how he got started. And, he went through that race. He did not win. But he did stay involved. He was, he had actually, let me back up a little bit. He had served as our friend's first campaign manager when they were in their mid-20s, and his friend had first gotten into politics. So it was I have to say it might have been in Rick's blood a little bit, but certainly nothing he and I ever discussed as a couple or any aspirations along that front. He was working, I was home with a toddler, and life was going along, and, So he lost that first race, but did stay involved and got appointed to a city board. And then the seat became vacant again. I think that person ran and won, obviously, or something. So Rick was appointed to city council in 2000. So he served and then had to run again. He ran twice in 2003, I believe, and then 2005. I could have that a little mixed up. I know it was a 2-year time frame against the same person who happened to be a city employee, and it was contentious to the point where there was some articles in the paper. The employee tried to, create his platform, which is expected, and tried to find things that he could nail Rick on, about maybe being too lenient with city staff or city funds or, what have you. I was pretty much looking back, pretty much consumed with, being an at-home mom who wasn't at home all the time. I have to say that. I was quite busy and immersed myself in volunteer work and, while raising our kids. And by 2002, we had added our son to our family as well. So, but I don't remember those races as particularly contentious. Everything the bar was raised every time he ran. There was something new, something more we needed to do. And, I think maybe politics was changing. I mean, he got a little more sophisticated. There was more donors because his name recognition was increasing. So it was changing to that extent that the races felt a little bigger and not as homegrown as a wine tasting in our living room.
Well, can we go back to that initial conversation real quick? I want to know, what was your gut reaction when it was first mentioned?
I'm trying to remember because it was, 19 years ago, I guess. It was probably like, really? Wow. Never thought of that.
But it wasn't an absolute like, oh God, no.
No, not at all. No, I like to think, unless something goes against, my core values, or I've never been asked, but if I've ever been asked to do something illegal, that's a flat out no.
Right.
That's nothing I even have to think about. But with this, it was just like, sure, we'll think about it. There was nothing really, preventing even thinking about it. So we gave it some thought, and he figured he had it in him to do it. And, I don't want to minimize, but, I don't know where you start out. Some start right out as going for a senator or a state house race. Starting out at city council, is not low, and there's nothing wrong with that. But in hindsight, it was a great place to start because you learn a lot, and you're not on, this huge political landscape. The media looks at you, but they're not looking as hard as they're going to look at a statewide race or a mayoral campaign or what have you.
And so you both got to kind of ease into this life a little bit.
I feel like that. Yes,
That's cool.
I definitely feel like we did. St. Pete, where we live, St. Petersburg, and we call it St. Pete affectionately, was in some ways a smaller town. It was smaller by population, but it was also smaller in terms of political activeness and things. And so it wasn't like there wasn't a lot of activism going on. So I don't think people were as politically engaged. Those who were involved in politics obviously were, but, it wasn't this, a lot of people didn't pay attention to city council races. They're divided up by district, but you vote citywide. So even if you don't live in someone's district, you can still vote for them in the general election. People didn't even know that. So there wasn't as big of an awareness. But yet, once elected, you have quite a role in some, change that you can affect.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you think it helped that one of your very good friends you had dinner with, maybe that was they were your Sherpas through this process, and maybe it didn't feel quite so daunting if you had friends who were in elected office prior to running your first time?
Oh, do you think that it helped Rick?
Or you.
Go through this?
Yeah, or you.
I don't know if it helped or didn't help. I don't know that it even came up. I know that he, he started the ball rolling, but it wasn't like we just kind of went with it, to be honest. And I know that sounds naive, and it wasn't that we didn't have a plan. He had a platform. He went to neighborhood meetings and introduced people to himself. But with that said, I think the friend, helped recruit him, and then Rick took the ball and, ended up finding a passion that I don't know that he fully realized he had.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Because he's still in it almost 20 years later.
I want to talk a little bit about the loss too, because I think we are struggling with an episode on political losses and trying to figure out how to thread the needle on highlighting the fact that losing isn't the end of the world, that there is life beyond a loss, and that many times candidates can run again and win. But I think that fear of losing and putting all this effort out to not get a reward at the end daunts a lot of people, particularly, younger candidates, women, people of color, LGBTQ candidates who are interested in running for office, but understand there's a huge sacrifice that they have to give up to do it. And then that the payout at the end might not come is very daunting to a lot of people. So we've been trying to figure out how to do this life beyond a loss race. So if you could just take us back to that election night where you were not successful, how did you as a family rebound from that?
Going into it, we knew that the odds were against Rick. That's not to say that we went in with the intention to lose or the assumption that he would lose, but we knew there was name recognition. He was running against an incumbent. There was a very small, finite amount of time to fundraise. So with that said, he still garnered, I think, about 40% of the vote. So for being a relative unknown, we didn't look at that as too bad. And like we said, any challenges that you have in life prior to any experience hopefully will help prepare you, whether you realize that or not. And we always went into it as, there is always life after this. There is, this isn't everything. And, if you also run a respectable campaign and you are true to yourself and to your values, and then you have nothing to be ashamed of. If you lose, you can't point to it and say, well, maybe I should have done this. I mean, there's always lessons learned, but, and then the key, and this is what Rick did, and this was advice that was given to him and would go for anyone, that if they lose and truly do want to try this again, is find a way to get involved, whether it's through, volunteering or being appointed to, if it's on a city and local level, being appointed to a city commission board or something like that, where you're still in the mix and you're learning city government a little bit, and you're staying relevant and getting people to know you, so that if you should want to come back and do this again, people have gotten a chance to know you, and you really have shown a commitment to your community. That would be my advice, and never taking it. You have to take it seriously, and somebody has to win and someone has to lose, and that's just how it goes. And if you know that there's always life after election day, it has to go on, and it has to be that way, and then you can move on, and that it's yes, it's disappointing, but if it, that will determine how you react to the loss, determines how bad you really want it. If you try again, if you stay involved, what have you.
Yeah.
So what is life like for you while Rick is campaigning? What is your role, and how has that kind of changed over time?
When Rick is campaigning, it slowly amps up from the moment, well, even before he makes the official declaration and announcement that he is going to run. We've, been talking about it between us up until the first mayoral run in 2013. Our kids were young enough where, they knew what he did, but they weren't really necessarily involved in the conversations and giving input or anything. So with that said, it was mostly between he and I. And I was always supportive because it was manageable, and he loved what he was doing, and he was making a difference. And so it slowly increases. You make the announcement, you start to put your staff together, and it gets busy. The meetings will increase, the events will increase, and you just have to adjust. You stay organized, and it's natural, whether you're the man or the woman who is the spouse, somebody is going to take on more at home, and that's just how it's going to be. But it's temporary, and as long as what I found to be successful, as long as there's still a connection and you're communicating, with your spouse, and you feel like you're connected to the campaign in some form, however you want to be, then it's manageable. It's certainly crazy and busy, and with kids, it just gets busier. But the way I always looked at it is, I'm like, there are people I know whose spouses either travel all the time for whatever reason or are deployed in the military. And, my spouse is coming home at night.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot to complain about. I mean, it doesn't say there was never stress, and I won't deny that, but, that's part of life. And so you just, thankfully it's gradual. It doesn't just start one day where everything just gets into like it is the day before the election. So you have a chance to build up to it. And what I found is, in every election and every campaign, we know the staff, and, campaign manager and field operatives and volunteers, and, and that doesn't mean that I'm there. I don't have time or the interest to be there all the time, and that's why he has a staff. But yet, I think we're all a team at that point. And if you can establish a rapport and, respect the jobs that they're doing, because it's highly intensive, and their job is to get your spouse elected. And so if you can find a way to be involved to whatever extent you want to be, whether it's canvassing, knocking doors, or just touching base, or, giving advice if asked, not unsolicited. Right. But, I think then it's certainly manageable, but it has to be a team effort, and you have to maintain a connection with your spouse in communication.
Totally. I can absolutely relate to that. In my household, our jobs both have like a cyclical nature to them, and my busy time is the first half of the year, because I'm working during the Washington State legislative session is the first half of the year, and then campaigns are obviously the second half of the year. So I get really busy for the first half. She gets really busy for the second half, and our roles in the household switch. So that like right now, I'm the one who goes home and cooks all the meals and walks the dog and is responsible for cleaning the house and doing all the stuff, knowing that that's going to flip like in January. Right. And then we just know that we have the second half of November through December to hang out. And then like, that's our time. Yeah. And that's what it's like for us every year.
Right. And if that works for you and you both are on the same page, and, therein lies the communication aspect. There's no assumptions made, and, then nobody, expects something that the other isn't necessarily able to provide. And, there's always something to be said, no matter how busy the campaign is, you've got to take some time. And, not an inordinate amount of time. You have to work really hard, and the campaign is a priority, but you know that there's an end. But you still got to take some time to hang out on a Sunday or go to a baseball game, whatever makes you happy. Go to dinner or something, because it can consume you.
So you're writing a book about being a spouse in politics. Can you talk to us a bit more about what inspired your thoughts around doing this, and how's it going?
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. It kind of transpired when after this latest mayoral election, which was in 2017, November 2017, it was his most contentious election to date. And it really, for a time, divided the city in some ways, and thankfully has brought people back together. But it was an extremely stressful time for a lot of us. And throughout the election and the campaign, which was the longest 6 months, and it seemed like years, to be honest. People would say, how do you handle this? And how do you do this? And how do you not, get upset? And, and you have to make a choice in how you personally are going to respond to things. Because there's certainly various ways you can respond, some better than not. And, I made a choice to just, no matter what, never respond on Facebook or any social media, and just take the high road, and even limit what we say in the house or, around the kids, because then that goes with them, in terms of frustrations or things. So I would just be in casual conversations with people that I've known in the community for years through boards that I've served on or volunteer experiences. Somebody's like, you should write a book. I had about 3 people tell me about that. And I was like, really? And so,
and Oprah would say, Kerry, that if the universe is telling you that, you must do that. That's Oprah's mission. I
guess everyone was speaking to me, I guess, and so, so I thought about it, and I thought about some ideas and, things to me that had just been over almost 20 years this March, had just been kind of learned on my own, or just a byproduct of having to get through something and then realizing we got through that, and this is how we got through it. And it's not the only way to get through things, but, people said, that there is some advice to give, because some people honestly don't know. And, you may think that a casual comment on social media that, oh, nobody's going to see it. No one pays attention to me. They only know who my spouse is. Well,
no way.
That's not true. If somebody's looking, they will find it, and it will become a story, and it could possibly negatively impact the campaign, things like that. So there's just certain ways and advice and it can run the gamut. It's not just social media, but it can run the gamut from, a lot of times the families are invited and asked to be in either photo shoots or, video shoots for commercials and printed pieces. And it's, they wonder, what do I wear?
Right.
Nobody ever cares what you wear until you're going to be on TV potentially. And, it's not rocket science, but there are definitely things that don't naturally, or that don't always come naturally to people,
Right.
that they should or shouldn't wear. And I'm not a fashion authority by any means, but
Me either.
I've been given advice, and I think there's some suggestions there. There's also ways to get through this with your kids. Basically, our daughter was 1.5, and now she's 21 next week. And so they've gone through periods where they're oblivious to what's going on. They just get in the car and go wherever we take them, and, to hearing about it at school, to possibly even being bullied at school because of who your dad is, things
Right.
like that. So there's a lot to say about how to respond when things happen, because they have happened, and how the political landscape has changed over the years, in terms of being a political family, if you will, which, until you're in it for such a long time, you don't really think of yourself as that. It's just something else your spouse does. So.
Right. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the most recent race that you said was the most contentious you've ever done.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about the political landscape of St. Petersburg during that time, and kind of how do you be the support person for your spouse who's running for office when you are also exhausted yourself?
Yeah. Well, this was my husband's second run for reelection. Not second run. His run for reelection. He ran for mayor in 2013 and was elected. So 2017 was, and you can run 2 terms or serve 2 terms here in St. Petersburg. So it had been rumored from December 2016 that a former mayor, not the one that he beat in 2013, but the one who served from 2001 to 2010, the timing changed, so he ended up serving for 9 years. But with that said, that former mayor was going to get back in the race. St. Pete has a long history, as many cities do, of the way things are done, and people being used to the way things are done, and certain movers and shakers in the city. And we have changed over the last 7 years, let's say, give or take a few years, and become a much more progressive city. We have people moving here from all over the country and all over the world for what we have. We have the arts, we have the parks and the waterfront. We just have a really friendly vibe. And I was born and raised here, and I've traveled but never lived anywhere else. And so I'm used to it, but people who come from outside just love it. And it has changed the landscape. It's changed the demographics. We are a different city. With that said, the former mayor decided that he wanted to get back in the race, and he went out in 2009 as a popular mayor, and he did raise St. Pete's image and did some good programs and things and all that. But with that said, it's a nonpartisan race here in St. Petersburg, and it became a very partisan race between the Republicans and the Democrats, and his camp of people versus, people who didn't like some of the new things possibly that my husband was doing, which were all improvements. And there was something that happened in 2015 related to infrastructure, which created, as our newspaper likes to call it, a sewage crisis. And so basically the newspaper started a campaign in their own way by reporting on this story and enticing this person to run. And it just created such division in the city. I mean, there would be community forums and debates, and the rooms would be divided between who was for this guy, and he would definitely stack the room, and where there would be shouting. It was very, very contentious, and our children were witness to that. And, they're old enough, and they know what's going on in the world, so it's going on everywhere. We weren't shielding them from anything. But it was just a very, very stressful time, because, when even in 2013 when Rick ran, social media was not what it is today or what it was in 2017. And things that were said and published and videos and memes distorting images and things like that were put on were just awful. And it was almost to the point where even kids at my son's school came up and said things to my son about his father, and
wow.
when my husband ran in 2013 and it was just our daughter in high school, no one spoke to her about the election at all,
right.
except maybe a couple teachers to say congratulations. But so you can see even in 4 years how things changed.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we were up against. And, I could go on and won't, but it was very, very, very tough because he had the newspaper writing things and then he had this candidate.
Wait, was it your old employer
and
newspaper who was writing these things?
Yes. Yes, it was.
How did that feel?
And there's a little mix. The CEO of the newspaper, his wife was a teacher for our son.
Oh wow!
Oh wow!
And he had her during election year. And she loved him. She loved him. But she made a big announcement in class that said, my husband and I both voted for your dad.
Oh no!
I mean, and this is my son in ninth grade.
Embarrassing.
So our kids are, and I don't believe that he voted. It doesn't matter at this point. But this is our kids dealing with this kind of thing, that shouldn't really affect them.
Right.
They should be able to go to school and not hear about their father or their mother or what have you.
Yeah.
So we just, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say, this has just spawned 15 more questions. And it really has, because I think it's so fascinating. Because do you feel that the newspaper, because you had worked there, that they had to maybe over demonstrate fairness? It seems like that was the first thing that hit me when I heard that is,
right.
I wonder if they feel that they had to overcompensate because we're just in such a toxic environment nationally when it comes to the media that the pendulum doth swung too far to the other side, and they just sort of put your husband through the ringer to deflect any criticism that they might be favoring him because of your former work there. I don't know.
I don't feel like my work there had an impact because I left there. I worked there from 1988 to 1998, and I left before he even ran the first time. So all those years that he had run, I think when they would do the articles comparison of all the candidates, they would just say, and his wife, Kerry, worked at the Times, just for full disclosure.
Right.
Yeah.
Not that anybody cares, but because it was so long ago. But with that said, I think, I really don't know what the impetus was for the type of coverage. I just know that the newspaper industry overall has been challenged in recent years because of the move to digital and the move away from handheld papers, and production and circulation has been down. Newspapers are struggling. The Times is one of the only independently owned papers in the country, and they pride themselves on that, which is a wonderful thing. They're not owned by a conglomerate that owns television stations and such. They were started here in St. Petersburg, and ownership is still local. But with that said, I do believe they were trying to possibly create a mayoral race, maybe, where there might not have been one, because, I don't know that the former mayor would have necessarily gotten in if he hadn't been really encouraged to do it. Not
right.
Like our friend who said, why don't you run for city council? But really encouraged to do it. But, and I think they wanted to have a race to cover so that they could increase subscription sales and newspaper sales. That's just my thoughts, my personal thoughts. I don't really know the answer to that, because otherwise, people are getting their news from so many other sources these days. They're not the only game in town. I don't think that it really had anything to do with me, their coverage. I honestly always felt their coverage was fair of my husband, and that's all he ever asked, that it be fair. But I think things changed, and when, finances are of issue with any organization or whatever, that can kind of drive actions and how people proceed.
Yeah, conflict sells. I mean,
totally.
We get that. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a couple of rapid fire questions and want to get your best advice on some of the topics. So I imagine these are going to be maybe part of your book. And so I just want to get, because you're an expert, I'm putting you in the expert column. And you're going to speak on behalf of all political spouses, men, women, trans, whatever gender identity you have. You're going to speak on behalf of all political spouses.
Wow. Oh, my goodness.
How does it feel?
So powerful. So social media, what's your best advice on social media for spouses?
To use a word that's being used a lot lately, resist. And I don't mean resist. Don't resist having your own social media platforms. I have a Twitter, I have Instagram, I have Facebook, but like I said earlier, if you see something, and you will, because you will look to see what people are writing about your spouse, or you'll just see it, and just don't comment. Whatever you do, don't comment. If you have to tell someone what you'd like to write, tell them. If you have to rant about something, rant about it. Just don't reply. Just don't even comment. Just don't do it. That's my best advice, because it'll be something new the next 5 minutes even, or, the next day. And many of the people who might say something negative are people who would never say that in the real world to your face anyway. We all know there's trolls out there. So with that said, resist. Yeah,
I like that. That's really good. If your kids are putting up with the campaign in school, what's your best advice to parents on dealing with that? Knowing that every situation is going to be unique, of course, and everybody's parenting model is different. But what is your advice to parents who might be struggling with either the fear of that happening to their kids, or they're dealing with it right now?
The best advice I would give is, have an ongoing dialogue with your kids. You don't need to create something that doesn't exist, but have a dialogue with them, and, about how things are going, and, what's going on, and, so that they know that this isn't just their parent going through this because they've chosen to run and put themselves out there. They've put their family out there, and make sure you're talking to your kids. But so, you would do that with anything, whether your spouse is in politics or not. But with regard to if something is said, which happened to my son at school last year, and he walked away, and I was really proud of him, because, when he was younger, he would try to, defend his friends, and, by defending someone, he'd sometimes, get in a little trouble, but he was trying to do the right thing. And he walked away. He literally turned his back last year when someone said something, and it was 2 boys that came up to him, and he walked away. And we've tried to set an example as well. And I mean, any parent will know that, your kids will usually mirror the examples they see at home, for better or worse. And you hope that they will do that when they're not with you. But one example, and I'll be quick, is that right before the campaign or the election last year, had to be between September and November, Rick and Samuel went out to the golf course. My son plays golf. And they were out just on a Sunday afternoon just trying to play 9 holes. And these kids from another high school who knew my son, and of course Rick is recognizable, knew who he was. And these are high school kids driving the cart, yelling and heckling my husband. And this is on a city course as well. And they're heckling him, and my son had to see them at a tournament the next week. And, my husband could have gone up to them and said, look, you're on a city course, you need to get off of here. Well, he didn't do that. He went to the staff and let them handle it. And that's the appropriate way. He didn't have an altercation with them. And that shows that my son, hopefully, will not and did not at school have an altercation with these other kids. So the best thing I can do is, walk away. Don't listen to it. They want to they want to bother you. And a lot of times these kids are reacting to, our world that we live in, unfortunately, which has gotten a lot more volatile and angry.
Do you engage the school district at all?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, what?
Do you engage the school district at all?
With regard to this?
Yeah, like if there becomes a problem, do you have a communication plan with the teachers or the principal or anybody in the school district about this, or does it have to rise to a level of concern first?
We haven't had to. There was honestly an incident last year where an image was created of my son. Our kids are Jewish. My husband's Jewish. And it was an anti-Semitic image that was created of my son because this other kid got mad at him for something. And his mother happened to like the opponent, so I'm sure he was hearing things at home. And it rose to the level of a hate crime. And the police, for that reason, did need to get involved. The kid got suspended. He could have really gotten expelled, but we didn't want that. I mean, I'd rather see the kid learn from it. I know he, was going through some stuff at home. But the point is that, our son had to learn how to deal with something like that as well. And now, they're both in a club together. They're not friends, but, they're coexisting, which is what everyone should be doing in society. And hopefully, this kid won't do something like this again. But to that extent, we haven't had to put them on notice necessarily. I think, it has, and that, which is nice. It hasn't been, that volatile. It was just that race last year produced some things that none of us had ever seen before. And, I don't know that that's the norm. I hope it's not the norm. But, that's when you're required to double down on your values and what you're willing to tolerate and what you're not willing to tolerate.
Yeah.
And you make a choice on how to proceed there.
Oh, intense.
Yeah.
Okay. So the other question that I had was on photography. So you had mentioned that you wanted to write a little bit of a section in there about photography. What advice do you give spouses for dressing kids? And I'll give you a reason why. I just had a pitch meeting with a potential client that's running for office, and he said he had just had, I think, his third or fourth child. And he was like, I am not doing the church dress-up photo where we're all sitting in a park, smiling cheesily at the camera. I refuse to do that. And I said, well, first of all, we're not going to do anything inauthentic with you and your family. But what do you guys like to do as a family? Like, what do you do normally as a family? And he's like, well, we go to playgrounds. We'll go on walks. We'll do something like that. And I said, perfect. We'll go to a playground. They'll wear whatever they wear normally at a playground. You'll be in like khakis and a button-down shirt, something nicer, but it doesn't have to be church best. And and you'll just be taking photos with them playing on the playground, like something authentic that matches you. And he's like, well, what do the kids wear? And I go, what they should wear on a playground.
Jeans and a t-shirt.
You should not be in what you would play in on a playground. You should be dressed up a little bit more nicely. But, do you think that that's good advice? I mean, you have done this a number of times, and what works for you and your family?
Yeah, exactly. I think what you told them is good advice. I would maybe take it a step further and bring several changes of clothes, especially if they're little kids, or even if we're adults, we could spill a drink on us in between takes or something. But I would say no logos. No, even like, let's say they like to wear the Ralph Lauren polo shirts or something.
Yeah.
You never know what people might assume if they see a kid in a polo shirt, but you can put them in a polo shirt, but just one without a logo. And maybe that's just my thinking, and it wouldn't really hurt anything. But, just wear something that, you want them to see the face and hear the message and not be looking at the clothes so much. And as long as they look nice, what they might wear, to the park. If you decide that you just want to walk down the street and go to the park, they might wear something totally mismatched or that might have a little stain on it. But obviously, common sense should prevail that you just, wear something clean, no prints or plaids.
No power clashing.
I think that's been our advice. And no clashing. But and definitely no teen or even like Disney or anything like that. Just something subdued, but that looks natural.
Yeah. I want to reemphasize that because you are the spokesperson for all political spouses right now. And what you said was really smart and really good advice, which is if they're looking at your clothes, they're not reading the words or, listening to the message. And I really want to emphasize that because I think that's superstar advice. So if they're looking at your clothes, they're looking at, your jewelry or your belt buckle or your hat or whatever you're wearing. They're not listening to the message or reading the message. So good advice. Yeah. Schedule.
Thank you.
How do you handle the schedule? Since you're probably the one that's going to be in charge of it, or the political spouse that we're talking about here is going to be in charge of the schedule. What do you do to keep everyone showing up on time and where they're supposed to be at any given moment?
Gmail is great with the way you can sync your calendars and have a different color for whoever. And back during this latest mayoral campaign, which was obviously to date the busiest, craziest time of our lives, we had color-coded schedules, and there was even one that I would work with the campaign manager to input in a different color, neighborhood meetings. Not that we all had to go to these, but there was a thought that Rick could go, or even I could go if they deemed them important. So I would add all the meetings I knew of and stuff. But with that said, Rick and I have access to each other's schedules all the time, and now that he's elected and still working as mayor, and we did this with his first term, I was always in contact with his assistant. I don't want to say always in contact. We were in contact in terms of, being able to see each other's schedules and things like that. And, of course, they're always adding stuff during the workday to his schedule. But, it's just that you go back to communication. If there's really something that, they see that, Samuel has a golf tournament or something. They might call me and say, well, are both of you doing this or just you? That kind of thing. And can we add this to Rick's schedule or something? So it's just constantly looking at those schedules and seeing what's going on, or maybe looking at the day of and seeing what the day looks like. So, and he, thank goodness for texting and WhatsApp and whatever messaging form you like to use. He and I will be like, talking to each other, throughout the day anyway. So like with anything, it boils down to communication, and good communication makes things easier, and lack of communication can create challenges. So that don't need to be there. So that's kind of how it, and it's going to get crazy, and it does, but thankfully, we're able to see where each other is and what we're doing, so we have some sense of, what's going on and what to expect.
Okay, final rapid fire question. Is the book going to be dedicated to Rainey and I? Are you going to let us write the foreword?
Is there a part 2? Are we coming back? How bad do you want your answer?
Just kidding.
Let me see. That might even involve another chapter. So
yes, we made the book.
I love it. No, you guys have been awesome, and this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, this was excellent advice. You've given some really, really great advice.
Yeah.
We want to also give you an opportunity to brag and promote not only your spouse, but your jurisdiction. So give us a few sentence wrap up about something that you're particularly proud of that your husband has done, or what makes St. Petersburg so special.
Well, like I said earlier, St. Petersburg is a special place. We are on the west coast of Florida, and we have a beautiful waterfront. We have the longest waterfront parks system, one of the longest in the country. And we just, have the great climate. It gets hot, but with that said, we have a wonderful climate that people want to come here, want to visit. We have a vibrant arts community, and it's not just, it's local artists, it's artists with disabilities, it's, the Dali Museum, a fine arts museum, an arts and crafts museum, and more even. And so we have so much to offer anyone who comes to visit. But with that said, any city has challenges. And, for many, many years, St. Petersburg was racially divided by this street, and it's still called Central Avenue. But, the one side was known as the side where primarily African-American people lived, and the other side was where white people lived. So Rick is most proud of, he has lowered the poverty rate in the African-American community to its lowest ever in St. Petersburg. And he's created the largest Community Reinvestment Act in Pinellas County, which is the county in which we live, which is one of the largest in Florida. And it's not just building buildings. He's creating programs like the mayor's youth initiatives with African-American youth, Not My Son, where parents will pledge to know where their kids are, and the kids will pledge to stay away from guns and trouble and things like that, and mentoring programs and things that are making a difference in this generation, not just a building that is going to sit there. They're making an impact on lives, and, that's for the future. And that is something, honestly, that has never truly happened. They'll say, we built you a grocery store, they'll tell the African-American community, but yet if there are no jobs or, not enough jobs to allow people to shop in that store, what good is the store? And that's just one example. So he's most proud of lowering the poverty rate, because then that changes lives.
Yeah.
And it gives everyone more people equity. You're getting on the road to creating more equality.
When are you running for office?
That's funny.
You don't have to laugh that hard, Kerry. You'd be excellent.
Oh, never say never, but, I'm pretty content. This, got a few projects, and I enjoy my work, and the book is definitely as they say, it's a labor of love, and it's a challenge, which I'm enjoying.
Writing a book helped launch Barack Obama.
Pardon?
I said writing a book helped launch Barack Obama, so.
All right, I want to take a left turn here because
Okay.
I need to ask about the puppy raising.
Oh, yeah. The puppy raising. I can't believe we
okay.
almost forgot about that.
I talked about Jake in the intro. Can you tell us what this puppy raising thing is?
Okay. In Palmetto, Florida, which is about 20 minutes south of us, is a facility. It's a 23-acre campus called Southeastern Guide Dogs, and they breed and raise puppies to be given to people who are visually impaired. They also have a veteran service dog program, and they do give, on occasion, like a Gold Star dog, to a family who's lost someone in the service. But their primary goal is to give people independence through a guide dog. So what they need are volunteer puppy raisers, and that's what we do. We love dogs. We've always had dogs. We love all dogs, but we've mostly had Labrador retrievers. And when the kids were little, they used to have a drop-in program at Southeastern Guide Dogs where you could just go down and do from like 11 to 11:30 during the week and do puppy hugging. And they put the puppies out for a little bit. You'd sit on the floor and play with Labrador puppies. I mean,
awesome.
If that doesn't make your day good, I don't know what does. So
Did we see the
when our
Krisemans
dog-
there frequently during re-election campaign? Did we?
That's right. Well,
It's the
we
best
would bring
coping
our dogs
mechanism.
into the campaign office. We
Oh,
used to bring
smart.
our dogs into the campaign office last year, and everybody would just loved it. But when our daughter was 12, she was preparing for her bat mitzvah, and she needed a service project that, they all have to do a service project that they initiate and so forth. So she wanted to raise a puppy. And now you can't really handle the dog unless you're 16 or older, but she took on a bulk of the responsibility in raising the first dog. And this was in 2009. So she, the puppy slept in her room, and she would take it out. We go to meetings twice a month, which are training meetings. They're exposures, like the meeting will be at Home Depot, so they get used to being in that environment, or an airport, or, what have you. And so she did take a big role for being 12 and 13 years old at the time. And that's how we got involved. We like to call it the vortex, because once you raise one puppy, you raise another and another and another. The greatest cure for giving up that puppy and taking it back to school is getting another one. So
Yeah.
we just really love the mission. We love the dogs. We love the people. It's one thing to volunteer and give your time, but when you happen to make friends that people you're friends with, and you have a good time doing it, that's a bonus. And so Jake was our 10th puppy, and he has a medical condition that was found out, and he's not going to be a guide dog. But so we've adopted him. And,
Yay!
Yeah, so he's still with us. I mean, but normally around 14 to 16 months of age, the dog would go back to Southeastern for more evaluation and training to really determine if they are going to be a guide dog. So we've had a few.
So you keep them for over a year?
Pretty much. We keep them about a year.
Okay.
It could be a little more. Yeah, and we get them when they're about 10 to 12 weeks, and then we keep them till they're about 14 to 16 months. So you get attached, and, you always know in your mind that this is not my dog, because you fill out evaluation forms every couple months. You have to take them to their vet down at Southeastern. So there's things you do that you wouldn't do with your normal dog, or your family pet. And, but you fall in love. You love the dog. You go through the toughest times. I mean, like kids, they get up in the middle of the night when they're babies. These puppies do. They get up and they need to go out, or they might have some digestive issues. And, it's a labor of love. And what you feel like you're doing for someone, potentially, helping them. Our daughter, she's in Gainesville at University of Florida, and they have a puppy raiser group there through Southeastern. And she finished a dog, which means that the person who started raising it couldn't finish raising it. So she had the dog for a couple months and then found out in July, thankfully she was home and for the summer a little bit, and she found out that this dog got matched. Well, her dog got matched with a girl who's going into her senior year of high school, who lost her vision when she was a baby. And, you know, and the thing that they do is when your dog gets matched, they have puppy raiser day, and you get to meet the person that gets your dog.
Oh
and
my gosh.
That's the best day ever, because you get to see your dog working. You get to see the impact that your dog has made. And there, you know, you reminisce and you're a little sad and you remember having your puppy or your dog. But when you see what that dog can do for someone, you know, it's really amazing. So that's why we do it.
Awesome.
And we're blessed
So
to be
amazing.
able to be involved with it.
What a rock star family you have.
You guys are awesome.
Vote to re-elect Rick Kriseman, for crying out loud. If you don't, you're a garbage human being.
Whoa.
All right. No, I'm just kidding. So, and that's our 14th piece of excellent advice, that if you are in a contentious race, go raise puppies.
Raise puppies.
Raise guide dogs.
Yes,
that's so amazing.
Right. That's right.
In
I'm
home
gonna
therapy.
Tell Southeastern, listen all the way to the end. I'm going to plug you guys. No, but thank you for asking about that.
Yeah.
We love talking about Southeastern and really believe in what they do.
Amazing. We'll include all the links to that and to your husband's website, and any book that you are going to be coming out with, we will gladly publish on here as well. Kerry, thank you so much for your time. CEO of the Political Spouses Therapy Group. We appreciate your time today. This was an excellent interview, and we really, really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your time and for having me, and it was wonderful, and maybe someday I'll get to meet you in the real world.
I think that would be great. Kerry Kriseman, thank you so much for joining us today. A big thank you again to Kerry Kriseman, the spouse of Mayor Rick Kriseman in St. Petersburg, Florida. Thank you so much for taking the time out and sharing your expert advice.
Yeah.
I'm going to say expert advice.
I think you're right about that. 20 years makes you an expert.
I think
being
so.
A political spouse. Just saying it. Yeah. Calling it now.
What is the Malcolm Gladwell book, Tipping Point? No.
I don't
What's
know.
the one about where you become an expert in your field? You have to put in like 10,000 hours of something. I'm pretty sure 20 years is about 10,000 hours.
At least. Has to be.
And that you reach expert level.
That's my quick math.
God, I can't remember the name of that book. Is it The Tipping Point? No.
I have no idea.
Oh, well. Digress. Let's pull it back to the interview.
You know, I love that she always came back to that communication is key, communication is key, communication is key. Like being on the same page about what like protocols are and whose responsibilities are where,
Right.
and what is supposed to be handled at what time is like the best piece of advice and the way to
Yeah.
be successful when you're busy people like this or you're in the public eye.
Yeah, I think what it says to me very loudly is that you can't just sort of jump in the river and hope that the current takes you where you're supposed to go and help form the path. That you got to pick up a couple oars and you got to
Very
like,
visual right
yeah.
now.
Is it maybe too much? Put
That
on
was
your
me
floaties.
rowing,
Yeah.
by the way, that sound effect.
Put on your floaties, and you got to be proactive in trying to steer the ship or the boat down the river. To continue with the analogy, and I think what it also says is that you can define whatever role that you want based on
Yeah.
the communication plan that you put in place. So if you want to be a more active participant on the campaign, you can. If you really just want to be the one that takes care of all of the responsibilities outside of the campaign, you can do that too. Or you can have a hybrid version of them, but the communication part is key. So
For sure.
very helpful. Looking forward to that book. Can't wait to...
Get our shout out.
I know.
Yeah.
I can't wait to
can't
have
wait.
it dedicated to us and
Have
be
my
part
name
of
in print.
I know. I want to be part of a book signing. That's what I want to.
Yes.
Should we sign her books for her?
Definitely.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think we've risen to that level.
Sure. Listeners, what do you think? We would love to hear your advice. Political Spouses is one of our most popular episodes. That's why we did a round 2. What did we cover that was particularly helpful for you? And what should we cover next? Because we'll
Yeah.
definitely have a round 3 of this as well, I'm sure, based on the responses that we've received previously. We'd love to know more. So feel free to contact us, podcast@electionu.com, or if you have a topic or subject that you think we should be covering that we're not covering, let us know. Like I had somebody the other day said, are you planning on doing an episode on political ethics? Which I was like, ooh, that is a really good topic.
Great idea.
Right. A state representative reached out to me and said, I think you should do a topic on political ethics and particularly around campaigns and what are non-disclosure agreements and what's the rule around privacy and sharing information. And I thought, ooh, that's a really good one. We should do some work on that. So I'm going to work on that today. I'm going to see if I can find some expert in the field on ethics and campaigns and get them to get their advice. So
I love it.
So just so you know, listeners, we listen to you and we put your feedback into action.
You listen to us, we listen to you.
Yeah, it's a cycle of life. So we also really appreciate folks going to iTunes and or Stitcher or wherever you're listening to us and leaving feedback and giving us ratings. It helps when people search, how do I run for office? It boosts us in the search engines and algorithms and all the fancy schmancy stuff that I don't understand. It helps people find our podcast and provides that resource to them. So please continue to do that. We really appreciate that.
Thanks for listening to the Election University podcast. I'm Rainey Cohen.
And I'm Jason Bennett. We will catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This week's episode has ended, but the campaign fun doesn't have to. Head on over to www.electionu.com, where you can access all of the links mentioned in today's episode, as well as the show notes. There you can also sign up for regular announcements or register for our campaign school. It's your very own online personal trainer for winning campaigns. www.electionu.com. Click, learn, win.